A Roman army stands at the edge of the world, swords drawn, not against an enemy, but against the sea itself. This is not myth. This is 40 AD, and the man who gave this order was already known as the most dangerous ruler on earth. History calls him Caligula, the emperor who made his horse a senator, who declared himself a god, and who now stood ready to fight the ocean. But was this truly insanity, or something far more calculated? A plan to humiliate the very army that had defied him? To understand what happened on that beach, we have to go back to a boy in soldier's boots, born into the most dangerous family in Rome. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus was born on August 31st, 12 AD, in the coastal town of Antium. His father was Germanicus, Rome's most beloved general. His mother, Agrippina, was granddaughter of the Emperor Augustus himself. As a toddler, he followed his father's legions on campaign, dressed in a miniature soldier's uniform, including tiny military boots called caligae. Amused soldiers gave him a nickname that would follow him for life: Caligula, Little Boots. It was an affectionate name for a happy childhood. But that happiness would not last. In 19 AD, when Caligula was just 6 years old, his father, Germanicus, died suddenly in Syria. Rumors of poisoning swirled through Rome. Whatever the true cause, Germanicus's death shattered his family's fortunes. Emperor Tiberius, suspicious and increasingly paranoid, turned against Germanicus's widow and children. Agrippina was exiled to a barren island. She would die there years later. Two of Caligula's brothers met similarly grim fates. Only Caligula survived, by learning, very young, how to hide what he truly felt. At 19, Caligula was summoned to Capri to live under the direct watch of the emperor who had destroyed his family. Ancient historians say an astrologer once told Tiberius that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. For years, Caligula showed nothing but calm obedience, even as he watched Tiberius's cruelty firsthand. Historians note that Caligula's survival likely depended on this discipline and on the protection of the Praetorian prefect Macro. On March 16, 37 AD, Tiberius finally died. The boy who was never supposed to rule was suddenly the most powerful man alive. Rome erupted with joy. The dark, fearful years of Tiberius were over, and Germanicus' son had returned to lead them. The Senate granted him absolute power almost immediately. Contemporary writers describe the first months of his reign as a golden age. He freed political prisoners, recalled the exiled, and ended Tiberius's hated treason trials. Within just 3 months, ancient sources claim more than 100,000 animals were sacrificed across the empire in his honor. For a moment, it seemed Rome had found the ruler it had been praying for. Just 7 months into his reign, in October of 37 AD, Caligula fell suddenly and violently ill. The illness was so severe that citizens across Rome filled the streets, praying for his recovery. The exact nature of his illness remains unknown. What ancient historians agree on is this: the man who recovered was not the man who had fallen ill. Suetonius, writing decades later, "We are dealing not with an emperor, but with a monster." Within weeks of his recovery, Caligula turned on those closest to the throne. Marcus Silanus, his own father-in-law, was forced to take his own life, for reasons ancient sources never fully explain. Even Macro, the very man who had helped Caligula survive and take power, was put to death without trial. The Golden Age was over. Ancient sources claim he burned through the entire imperial treasury in under a year. To cover the losses, he seized the estates of wealthy Romans through false accusations and forced confiscations. Years earlier, an astrologer said he had no more chance of ruling than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. Now emperor, Caligula built that impossible bridge and rode across it in armor. It was a message to Rome, to the gods, and to fate itself. No prophecy, no ocean, no barrier would ever stand in his way. Emboldened, Caligula took a step no Roman ruler had dared take while still alive. He began to call himself a god. He ordered the heads removed from famous statues of the gods across Greece and Rome, replacing them with his own likeness. And in the palace stables, his favorite horse, Incitatus, lived better than most senators. A marble stool, a jeweled collar, and dinner guests invited in the horse's name. Ancient writers even claimed Caligula considered making the horse a consul. Whether literal or exaggerated mockery, the message to the Senate was unmistakable. Your rank means nothing to me. Caligula's closest relationship was said to be with his favorite sister, Drusilla. Suetonius and Cassius Dio, writing generations later, claimed the two had an incestuous relationship. When Drusilla died suddenly in 38 AD, Caligula was reportedly devastated and did something unprecedented. He had her declared a goddess. She became the first Roman woman ever formally deified. Grief, it seemed, could make even an emperor break tradition. By 39 AD, a conspiracy was uncovered involving his own brother-in-law Lepidus and his sisters Agrippina the Younger and Julia Livilla. Lepidus was executed. His sisters were exiled to remote islands, forced to carry the ashes of the men they had lost. Trust between Caligula and Rome's ruling class had completely collapsed. And with his enemies at home dealt with, Caligula turned his ambitions north, toward the empire's most distant frontier. Britain was, to Romans, the edge of the known world, a mysterious island shrouded in myth beyond the great ocean. No emperor before him had dared invade it. Conquering Britain would make Caligula more celebrated than even the legendary Julius Caesar. Ancient sources describe an army of unprecedented size gathered at the Channel coast near modern Boulogne, then called Gessoriacum. Everything was in place for history's next great conquest. And then, according to ancient historians, something went wrong. The army that was supposed to conquer Britain refused to set sail. Historians record that fear spread through the ranks, fear of the open ocean. Some ancient sources describe outright mutiny, soldiers refusing direct orders from their emperor. For Caligula, this wasn't just a logistical failure, it was a direct challenge to his authority as emperor and as a god. What Caligula did next would become one of the strangest and most debated episodes in all of Roman history. Instead of ordering a retreat or punishing the mutineers directly, Caligula gave an order no one expected. He ordered the entire army into full battle formation, not facing Britain, but facing the open ocean itself. Catapults and siege engines, weapons built to tear down city walls, were wheeled out and aimed at the water. Trumpets sounded the call to attack. Soldiers stood ready, weapons raised, waiting to fight an enemy that could never be defeated. Then, with a single gesture, Caligula gave the command that would echo through history. Thousands of Roman soldiers charged into the shallows, stabbing their swords into the waves and hurling spears into the surf. It was, by any military definition, a completely pointless battle. And yet, Caligula watched from the shore as if this were any real campaign. After several minutes, the strange assault ended. Caligula declared in front of his entire army a total victory. Rome, he announced, had conquered the sea itself. Then came the order that made this moment truly unforgettable. Every soldier was told to gather seashells from the beach. According to Suetonius, they filled their helmets and the folds of their tunics, as if collecting treasure from a defeated enemy. Caligula called them spoils of the sea, trophies owed to the great temples of Rome, the Capitoline and the Palatine. He also ordered a great lighthouse built on the coast, a permanent monument to his victory. Finally, he rewarded every soldier with a bonus of 100 denarii each, as if they had won the greatest campaign in Roman history. For centuries, this story has been used as the ultimate proof of Caligula's insanity, Suetonius and Cassius Dio, our main ancient sources, present it as straightforward madness. Modern medical researchers have pointed to his earlier illness, proposing epilepsy, temporal lobe damage, or even lead poisoning as possible explanations for erratic behavior like this. But none of these theories can be proven, and that raises an uncomfortable question. What if the sea wasn't a symptom of madness, but a message? Some modern historians argue this wasn't madness at all. It was humiliation, deliberately aimed at the very soldiers who had refused to obey him. By making his own army fight an enemy that didn't exist, Caligula publicly stripped them of their dignity, without shedding a drop of Roman blood. It's worth remembering, almost everything we know about Caligula comes from writers who were not even alive during his reign. Suetonius wrote roughly 80 years after Caligula's death. Cassius Dio wrote nearly 200 years later. Both belong to Rome's senatorial class, the very class Caligula had humiliated and terrorized. The only writer who actually lived through his reign, Philo of Alexandria, described a far more complicated ruler, brilliant in his early years and later dangerously erratic, but not always the cartoonish madman later legend created. Back in Rome, senators who had once cheered his rise now spoke of him only in careful whispers. The Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the emperor, harbored growing resentment, especially among officers Caligula had personally humiliated. One of those officers was Cassius Chaerea, a respected military veteran Caligula openly ridiculed for his voice and manner. By early 41 AD, Chaerea had decided he would not endure the humiliation any longer. Chaerea began quietly gathering fellow officers and senators who shared his hatred of the emperor. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Catch Caligula alone, away from his personal guard, in a narrow palace corridor. They chose their moment carefully. During a public games festival, when the emperor's routine made him briefly predictable. On January 24, 41 AD, Caligula left the games early, walking through a private corridor with only a small escort. It was the opportunity Chaerea had been waiting for. The man who once declared war on the ocean was about to face an enemy he never saw coming. According to ancient accounts, Chaerea and his fellow conspirators confronted Caligula in the corridor, and the emperor was killed in the attack. His guards arrived moments too late to save him. In the chaos that followed, his wife, Caesonia, and their infant daughter were also killed by the conspirators. A brutal end to the entire imperial household. Caligula had ruled for less than 4 years. He was 28 years old. In the confusion following his death, some senators dreamed of restoring the old Roman Republic entirely. But it was the Praetorian Guard, not the Senate, who decided Rome's fate, installing Caligula's uncle Claudius as the next emperor. Caligula's name and images were quietly removed from many public monuments. What remained was a legend, shaped almost entirely by the men who had feared and despised him most. So, was Caligula's war on the ocean true insanity, born from illness and unchecked power? Or was it something colder and more calculated? A public humiliation of soldiers who dared to defy their emperor? If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind history's strangest legends, like this video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, madness or calculated cruelty?